I am delighted to welcome you to our weekly time of Wednesday gathering, a time when students, staff, faculty, friends, alums, and others come together to talk about the most important issues in our world these days. And today we are delighted to welcome Susan Thistlethwaite and Carter Heyward. It's going to be an amazing, amazing session. So just a couple of Zoom best practices, because we are a large and growing group. Please keep as you come into the room, you're automatically muted. If you can keep your microphone on mute when you're not, unless you're speaking, that ensures that we won't have any outside background noise and we'll all be able to enjoy our speakers. I also encourage you to open up your chat window. There's a little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. If you pop that open, you can chat to the group or you can chat to individual people. So if there's someone you want to say hello to, that's a great way to do that. Also a wonderful way to put in questions, comments as you're listening to our speakers today. I'll keep an eye on chat while they're speaking, and so I can alert them to any burning questions that might be emerging from the group. If you happen to be joining from a device that doesn't show your name, like if you're just so-and-so's phone or somebody's iPad, you can change your name to your actual name so we know who you are. In your square on the top right corner, there's 3 little dots. And if you click on those dots, it gives you an option to change your name. So we would love to have you be a name and not a device. That would be fantastic. And so I think those are my best practices for joining our Zoom. Also, just so that everyone is aware, we do record these every week. The recordings are then posted up on our website and the CTS YouTube page. So by being in this room, just know that we are being recorded. So I'm going to turn us now to our words of gathering. And Haley Hudler, who is a student here at CTS, will be bringing us those words this morning. Haley.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I was telling the group earlier that I would usually be on my computer for these Zooms, but I spilt liquid all over the keyboard. Oh, no. And my laptop seems kaput, so now I'm here on my mobile device. But just a quick intro, I'm Haley Hudler. Like Lisa said, pronouns are she and her. I'm a Master of Arts student. This year is my last year, and I'll be writing my thesis. And my thesis topic, it's the first month and a half into school. So right now my topic, and it may alter as I continue the rest of the academic year, but I'll be writing on how the theology of adoption has been used to abuse or used to oppress. As someone who's an adoptee and an adopted person, I feel it's really important to kind of bring together what Christianity and my faith upbringing has said about my community in particular. So if any of you were curious about that topic and are wanting to learn more about the research that I'm doing this year, I'll later throughout the Zoom, I'll also put in my personal CTS email. So any of you who are interested in the topic can keep up and stay updated with what I'm doing with that. I'm now going to introduce you all the poem that I would like to share with you all. It's called Shoulders by Naomi Shahib Nye. And I will post the poem, the words, into the chat right now, because I know some people enjoy having the words in front of them as they read. So there you go. Great. All right. Nice. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No karma splash him. No karma splash him. No car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he is not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted just to share that poem with you all, because for me, it reminds me kind of that collective community that we all share together as we are living in the same generation, the same time on this earth together. And it reminds me to handle myself with care as someone who, so I feel a lot of people are really hard on themselves and just don't really kind of treat themselves with love, just as we like to put a lot of people, our friends and family, before ourselves. And sometimes it reminds me to handle other people with care, because sometimes I don't know what people are going through. I don't know what struggles they're facing. And I also have this poem to remind me of treating myself well as well. So I will turn it over to Dr. Susan, if that's the next person to speak.
I think it actually comes back to me, Haley, but thank you for those words of gathering. That was a beautiful, beautiful poem. Friends, we have two amazing guests joining us today, and I'm so pleased to welcome both of them. Reverend Dr. Carter Heyward served as professor of theology at the Episcopal Divinity School for 30 years, teaching mainly modern Anglican and feminist liberation studies. She has written or edited 17 books, including most recently the forthcoming Tears of Christopona, Mystical Musings on Grief, Evil, and Godding, as well as The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism and What We Can Do. A native North Carolinian, in retirement, she returned to the North Carolina mountains, where she lives with a number of women, and more recently men and kids too, in a loosely knit community. She and her family, including her partner Sue, have a small horse farm, and they live in the company of cats, dogs, and the wild creatures of their neighborhood. She founded the organization Free Rein, a therapeutic horseback riding center that serves over 300 kids and adults with special needs each year. She holds leadership roles in a number of activist organizations, including her local NAACP chapter, as well as the Democratic Women Club. And here at CTS, our Heyward Boswell Society is named in her honor. And in 2010, CTS awarded her with an honorary degree. I was a student at that time, and I was impacted and inspired by her time on campus and at our commencement ceremony that year. And I am delighted to welcome her back virtually. She is joined today by Reverend Dr. Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite, Professor of Theology Emerita and President Emerita of CTS. Dr. Thistlethwaite was president of our seminary from 1998 to 2008. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ since 1974, she is the author or editor of numerous books, including Interfaith Just Peacemaking, one of my favorites, and she has been a translator for 2 different translations of the Bible. She and her husband now make their home in the mountains of Colorado, where she is a champion of public theology, writing a column for her local newspaper, The Vale Daily. She has also turned her writings to fiction and has just released her 4th mystery novel entitled What She Will Become, set during the 1960s, during the years of the Lavender Scare. All of her writings cover complex social and ethical terrain, and this continues to be true in her mystery fiction. If you have not yet read her first trilogy, When Demons Float, Every Wickedness, and Where Drowned Things Live, I encourage you to add them to your reading list immediately. I was so privileged to study with Susan during my tenure as a CTS student and to travel with her to Palestine and Israel for the first CTS study tour in the Holy Lands. She is a gifted theologian, a superb teacher, an adored grandmother, and a lovely human. And I am so pleased to welcome her to our time today. Susan.
Well, thank you, Lisa. What a love.
You're muted. You're muted.
Mike, I unmuted and it muted me again. I hope Zuckerberg is not monitoring this call. In any case, I wanted to introduce Carter a little bit more. Carter and I have known each other a very long time. And met Carter at the Episcopal Divinity School, and I think it was 1980, Carter, maybe 1979. Yeah, when I was graciously welcomed to the EDS library because I was writing my dissertation in absentia. And Carter and I met, immediately become friends. And I know one of our favorite memories is sitting in the sunshine on the steps of EDS. And for some reason, we had an EDS catalog and we renamed all the classes because, feminist theology, we had to label our courses, feminist theology, liberation theology, but the guys, they would just go theology, right? And so we renamed them as three patriarchal white males from Tübingen. And then what was the one, Carter, that you had about liturgy that was particularly good? Do you remember that one?
It could have been just about anything.
Sexist and racist liturgies.
And
from
big
the
fly.
19th
Yeah.
century. And so we had a rollicking good time. And so, I'm at EDS. Carter is, Carter's at EDS and I'm at CTS. And this was a time in the 80s of homophobic activity on the campus of the University of Chicago. A group who called themselves the Great White Brotherhood of the Iron Fist, swear to God, a group of young white male homophobes was running around outing people on the U of C campus. If I put a group name like that in a work of fiction, you people would say to me, what are you, Susan, that's a little over the top. So the Great White Brotherhood was active and creating quite a climate of fear, especially when in 1991, they started sending threatening letters. They sent 3 threatening letters with a powder in them to 3 gay members of the biology department. And at this time, we had no out faculty at CTS, but the LGBTQI students wanted to have a LGBTQI at that time gay liberation student group. And so even then, fond of mysteries, this group met in my office and they asked me to be their advisor. And we decided, like Sherlock Holmes, to hide in plain sight. And so we came up with the name Heyward Boswell Society. And if you did not know who Carter Heyward was, and you did not know who John Boswell was, you would think we were sitting around reading poems to each other. So the Heyward Boswell Society was launched. The next year, Carter came. We had a big celebration in the old McGifford House. And this became the only LGBTQI student group in Hyde Park for a while, and has a very, honorable history in terms of standing up to homophobia by using our smarts. So, so I was going to start, as Carter and I were talking about this, the other 3 novels that I've written are contemporary. They are about a young woman professor who in some ways is in fact me, solving crimes on a college campus. And someone said to me after reading the first novel, I actually thought the murder was going to happen at the faculty meeting. So I've drawn on my experiences as a faculty member to write those. But I think the decade of the 1960s is extraordinarily formative for the kinds of issues that we are struggling with today, and have found that very few people, they know about the Red Scare, they know about the Cold War, but they don't know about the Lavender Scare, which was the persecution of LGBTQI folk as national security threats, especially within government. And so I set this novel, begins on the day before JFK is inaugurated. And I mean, you want to talk about a decade of political polarization. Think of think of the assassinations that happened during that decade. Think of Vietnam, think civil rights movement, the freedom rides. It is a very formative period. But one of the things it does in this Lavender Scare is that the imprint of what national security means is the heterosexual white male elite body. That's what national security means. And if you're not within those boundaries, you're a national security risk. John Kerry actually apologized for the persecution of LGBTQI people as security risks at the State Department before he left being Secretary of State. So thinking about the, you know now that I call this performative theology, that I think it's that we think about theology abstractly, and that's important, but I think it's also possible to see it in action and to do that in fiction. And so I started thinking about national security in the body, and J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, you want to pick one person who is responsible for our current dilemmas, I'd pick Hoover. So, I mean, this is someone who set out to destroy American civil liberties and did so fairly effectively. So when I was working on the novel, I got a hold of Carter and I asked her if she'd be willing to read it and endorse it. And she did. And as in all my novels, there is a dog. And Carter and I also have that in common, our love of animals, our love of dogs. This is a new kind of dog for me, however. This is a very sarcastic dog. And you actually hear the thoughts of the dog on, the Washington establishment, as well as the need to sniff out the corruption. So Carter and I have talked, and so over to you, Carter. What would you like to bring up or ask me about the novel as you read it and thought about it?
Well, first of all, thank you. And let me just say to Lisa, thank you for that very gracious introduction and this opportunity to be back with my colleague, Susan. And after having read now these 4 novels of yours so far, I feel like this is a great beginning. And I love what you're doing with theology through fiction. It's creative, it's intelligent, it's evocative, it's wonderful. And you can say in a way so much more.
Yeah.
I've always been told by my friends who are writers of fiction, you can get away with more in a sense, because you can just cover it up in a little so-called fiction and you know better. I want to start, let me say one more thing, because there's at least one other person on here. I've just had a chance to just glimpse down the list of who's with us. And one is my old friend and colleague and former student, one of my favorite folks ever, and that's Mike Johnson. I just want to say hello to you, Mike. And I'm really, really happy to see you there. And there may be others, in addition to Lisa, whom I have known before, whose names I have not seen yet. But I'm assuming that in some ways, we are all connected and probably know each other better than we think we do. I'm going to start with Miss B, the dog, because I think in order to understand Alex, who is the you or the central character, the protagonist who is taking us through this mystery, the young woman who's just begun her new job in DC, she's really in a conundrum when it comes to her own identity, dealing with her own heritage, trying to pass in DC to be the right kind of woman who will be accepted by the white waspy, although we have Kennedy now becoming president, nonetheless, she's trying to be white, fairly affluent, European, sort of Anglo type European woman. And she's not. She's from a socialist workers, Hungarian family. She doesn't want to be recognized as that, but the one character at the beginning who knows her is Miss B. And I think, to me, Miss B is the lodestar in this novel.
Yep.
She is the character throughout, and there's nothing hokey about it, because of those of you who know animals, who have animals, know full well that it's our animals. When all else fails, they're the ones who know. They know what's happening.
Mhm.
And although we speak different languages, they're the ones who keep us grounded. And I think Miss B keeps Alex grounded throughout this novel. And so it's no coincidence that it begins with a jog between these two. And I'm not giving away too much to say they're very much at the beginning. On the first page, there is a body. And Miss B is the first character in the novel who knows about this body. And once we began to have to deal with the fact that this is a murder mystery, we realized that this body being there has something to do with the Lavender Scare. Because here we actually have a gay man who has been killed and left by the side of the Potomac River. But Susan goes ahead to weave and twist together the anti-communist scare with the anti-gay Lavender Scare. So the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare are shown to be part of the same scare, and certainly they are the same scare as far as J. Edgar Hoover is concerned. Now, people here probably know enough about Hoover to understand that Hoover was himself a closeted homosexual. He was known to have supper with his lifelong friend, Clyde Tolson, in the same restaurant at the same table for decades in Washington, D.C. All the while, he was out there persecuting gay people, gay men, lesbians, fully supporting Senator Joseph McCarthy in the early 50s, in 1954, I think it was, 53, 54, during the hearings in which McCarthy managed to oust hundreds of so-called threats to national security who were thought to be communist, and in some cases were. You write this book brilliantly about revealing this treacherous dynamic going on in the 1960s. And you're absolutely right, I believe, Susan, to say that this gives us a window. It's somewhat a foggy window in ways, not your book, but the times themselves, because we're not exactly replicating the 1960s. So much has happened, so much progress has been made. As a lesbian woman myself, and I know some of the rest of you are bound to be lesbian, bi, queer, whatever as well as allies. We are all in a different place now than we would have been, those of us who were alive then in the 1960s. But still, there is more going on than meets the eye. And that's the great thing about a novel. You can really play with that. There's more going on today than meets the eye, way more going on than meets the eye. And in the realm of sex and gender, so much happening. Focusing right now on trans for the most part in the political realm. But it's really not only about trans, it's about all sex and gender matters. And it's also always about women. And so that what has happened in Texas around Roe Wade and women's rights to choose is all part of this. It's a whole cloth. And so, this book, What She Will Become, is a wake-up call to those who need such a call. And for those of us who are already sort of in touch with the fact that we're living in a very dangerous moment, it's just a refreshing and perfectly delightful way of getting even more in touch with that through your imagination, Susan, and through your characters, and through Alex in particular. And I understand this is the first in a series. And if you read the novel, you will know where the second novel will take us, at least part way, because you set it up beautifully in terms of foreign policy and national security.
Yeah. The next one is about just how dumb the Bay of Pigs was. I mean, I just like, and we they'll never suspect it's us. They'll absolutely never suspect it's us. The anti-communist fervor. Thank you, Carter, for pointing out. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, dear.
But I never got to any question for you, and I have.
Okay, go.
Probably many of them, but the first one is how did you do this in terms of, because another issue that is red hot center in this novel is race. and racism, white supremacy, not only in the South, but in the North, in DC and in New York City. So it's not locating the problem down here where I live in North Carolina right now, although God knows there is a problem here. But you're pointing out through Gwen, who is Alex's roommate, and Gwen's family, and the murder of somebody in Gwen's family, and the fabulous portrayal you make of the homegoing, which is the funeral service in New York City, and you see racism at work in New York. How did you do this? How did it all come to you?
Well, I must give full credit to Cheryl Townsend Jokes for the jazz funeral. I am the least musically adept person you will ever meet. And Cheryl is the most musically adept person, has a radio program on music, as well as being a wonderful, wonderful sociologist of religion. And so I called Cheryl up and I said, oh, help me, Cheryl. And, we get by with a little help from our friends. I am overwhelmed, actually, with seeing so many faces here that I know for so many years. And, if ever that myth of the individual, the solitary self, is blown to smithereens, it is in what she will become. Who did I become from the LGBTQI students who attended CTS, the faculty colleagues, the trustee colleagues? Who did I become from the enormous gift of the number of African-American students, Asian students, and Latinx students, and so forth? It began, I am in debt to them, Carter, and to you, for being able to try to, these books are read largely by book clubs, and especially, and that's why I have the discussion questions in the end. And I get mail from people who've been in the book clubs or the pastors who've led the church book clubs. And it's a way to get some of our very complex ideas to groups in a way that there's not quite as many barriers to, even the dog is sneaky. I mean, the dog is cute while sarcastic. And I am not joking. I write these novels to be sneaky. I am trying to get as much in as I can. But when you ask me where it comes from so many of the people on this call, and others who in their papers told me what it was like to come out as an African-American man. And that's in the character of Stephen.
Yes.
But it's also the most autobiographical novel I have read, because my family are Hungarian immigrants. They came as children to the sweatshops in New York City. My great aunt was a labor organizer for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And Central European heritage is not quite white. And there's this wonderful book on the struggle for whiteness, many books now on the struggle for whiteness. But I have been with my great aunt when she's been taught in the garment district in New York. And that apartment, Alex's aunt and her mother's apartment is my great aunt's apartment. And Mrs. Bronsky is real. Mrs. Bronsky trying to feed me her food budget. Food is a big issue in the novel, because I knew my great aunt had starved as a child. And Alex struggles with anorexia. That's in there. When she really feels threatened in her identity, she can't eat.
That's right.
Yeah. And the more she's willing to become herself, the more she can eat.
That's right.
And,
that's
and I don't mind telling you all, I had a few runs with mild forms of anorexia when I was very young. And it's all about control. If you can't control anything else, at least you can control food.
Mhm.
But what I learned from my great aunt and all those visits to in the garment district to go get the really beautiful fabric in the basements. And my great aunt, she would go like this, and how the fabric would drape. That's a disguise. That's how she hides. And tries, as Carter well points out, she's trying to be white.
Yeah.
And not Central European. And I'm the whitest person in this generation in my family, because I think there's some German genes in there from my father. But how race is so multivalent. And boy, in 61, I mean, researching, the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., was the first majority African-American city in the United States. Why don't they have representation in Congress? I mean, it's obvious when you know that history, why they don't have representation in Congress, because the majority African-American city. And I read many books on the vibrant LGBTQI life of Washington, D.C. Also, I learn a lot researching these novels. I learned a lot. I do not care for JFK, which you can discern from the novel. And
he's a real character. And he's right there.
Yeah, he is. He is. The sex harassing so-and-so. So it's a chance, as you point out, Carter, it's so different than writing theology, where you just, you just make it up. In the fiction, you can just make it up. And it's very important too to have had the dog, because there is an element of drug trafficking, and doggy noses become critical for sniffing out the drug trafficking. So other themes you'd like to bring up?
There was one thing that I didn't mention that I thought was also extraordinarily important for us all. And this, I know as women, and I see that we're not only women in this class, but I dare say there's some kind of male analogy to this. But in women's lives in this country, the relationship between women of different generations is so important. And you see this in this novel, not only between Alex and her mother and her aunt, and the older, younger woman thing, and the tension and the love and the tension, but it's a creative tension for the most part, certainly in the family it is. But then you see the tension between the Senator Madeline Richards Carpenter, who this is the person that Alex is beginning her work with. And my image of Senator Madeline Richards Carpenter is she is a very white, proper lady, and dressing the part of a woman senator, the only woman in the Senate. Is that right? I believe.
Yeah. Yes, I made that up, but yes.
And but Alex is desperate to please the Senator Carpenter, and so the relationship between them is utterly professional, cool, distant, mutually observant, I think, each watching the other to see if it's going to be okay. And I found myself from about the 30th page in this novel all the way through to the end, just wanting them both to be real. You wanted one of those women to cut the pretenses and begin to let the other one know who she really is. This is my agenda, not yours, Susan, and not necessarily the other readers, but that's obviously a theme that I latched onto, which is, why can't these women say what's really going on? Because you discover that this woman's late husband knew more than, was also a senator. In fact, she has replaced him, I believe. And he was on to J. Edgar Hoover. He understood the late husband and knew that this creep was leading the FBI, worse than a creep, that he really was duplicitous, etc. But you don't know whether his wife knows that or not. But Alex knows that too. And you want somebody to be able to talk about what's really happening.
Yeah.
In the room, but it's not yet happening. And so that's really an interesting tension that you are creating for your readers to have to deal with, but what it landed me in is our generational communication as women with one another, with younger women, as with our mothers and grandmothers who, when you're my age, have gone on to another realm. But that's just a fascinating thing in your novel.
Well, I think, of course, that's a microcosm of Washington as a whole. Mm-hmm. None of these people tell each other the truth.
That's right.
And Alex muses on this when she's writing for the senator that she's going to have to write fiction because and she struggles to present some of the truth of the hearings that she goes to, but the hearings themselves are lies.
That's right.
And the scene where J. Edgar Hoover is testifying before Congress is taken word for word from a YouTube video of Hoover doing this. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have to watch the YouTube video to believe that, he is lying through his teeth. And about communism and the way that he dismisses civil rights is just extraordinarily dangerous. And Eleanor Roosevelt said his FBI was the Gestapo, and she was right.
Isn't this contemporary though? This is where we are today. You look at the Mueller Commission. Look at, I'm thinking, my God, and again, you didn't do this with the novel, but what I'm thinking was I was reading the novel, I could not help but compare Stevenson, the man who had run for president against Eisenhower in 52, who is in this novel, and is actually comes across as one of the few people with a lot of integrity,
right,
who will not let that integrity go. And I think, well, is that a little bit like Robert Mueller? I think he seems to me that Stevenson was politically savvier than Robert.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
And in the same position, I think Stevenson might have made some other choices than Mueller did. But there is that sense of where are the righteous ones?
Right.
Even with the thread of righteousness, Stevenson is one in your book. Where are they today? I had lunch with people right before this class, and somebody was at lunch was saying, I cannot believe it. So did you hear Senator Grassley the other day? And I had heard just a news clip of it, but when Grassley, who I, used to be a very conservative, somebody I never would have agreed with on much of anything, but a decent sort, suddenly is up there, we're standing beside the former president saying, of course you'd be insane with his 96% popularity rating among the Republicans in Iowa, you'd be insane not to appreciate his endorsement. Well, at least he said it. At least that's an honest statement. But you think, my God, this is where we've come to. Because when you're talking about the culture of lies in DC, has that done anything but grow exponentially in the last 50 or 60 years?
Yeah.
And so occasionally somebody will speak truthfully, like Senator Grassley just did, although it's appalling what he's talking about.
Right.
But yikes, really, just plain yikes.
Well, the other truth tellers in the novel are Higgy and Brownie.
Oh, yes.
I love Higgy and Brownie. They're going to have a much larger role in the next novel.
They're the queerest people in the book.
They're queerest people in the book. Yeah, they are. And, Bruce Higginbottom and Mary Brown. And Mary Brown's a journalist, and Higginbottom works for Stevenson. And the memo, that memo is real, Carter. That memo is real. That's from a Freedom of Information Act, not a book that I got of civil rights destroying memos from Washington. But I wanted the heroic characters to be LGBTQI
Yeah.
and African-American, because they were the people being so horribly persecuted. And Alex herself changes. She changes and she starts coming out of her shell because she meets these people who could be killed for the truth telling they're doing. And all of a sudden she realizes there's worse things than somebody realizing you're Central European. So, it's that was the trajectory in a novel. I mean, you write these novels and the characters have to grow, they have to change. And another central theme of the novel, I think I'll say this one thing and then Lisa, turn it over to you so people can jump in on the conversation, is power. How do you get it? Who has it?
Oh yeah.
How do you, and that's what makes the cocktail parties. So one thing, when I was writing for the Washington Post, I happen to be in Washington, I get invited to these power cocktail parties. And I've got two cocktail parties. One, the ostensibly cisgender people, and one, the LGBTQI people. And at the cocktail parties of the cisgender people, theoretically, there's some of the same people, but not the same conversations. So, but Washington did, I don't think it's true anymore, but Washington did run on cocktail parties. So over to you, Lisa, because we've got a crowd here and a lot of voices to get in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you both for this wonderful conversation. I'm not going to say much more than that because I want to make room for others. If you have a comment or a question, you are free to unmute yourself and share that, or drop it in the chat, and we'll go from there. But what is this conversation sparking for you? What questions do you have, or comments for either Susan or Carter?
Well, I see a good one here in the chat about today's attack on civil liberties and the impact of nationalism today. Now, Carter, you just finished a book on Christian nationalism. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
I haven't finished it, but I'm writing it, and that, I'll say just a little bit. That several of my friends and I down here, right after the insurrection at the Capitol, excuse me, I'm losing stuff on my computer here. After the insurrection at the Capitol, we said, we need to say something about this. We being, at the time, 4 white Christian women. And one thing led to another, including at first the 4 of us were attempting to write a book together, and finally it's turned into 3 different books with my portion of the book becoming its own book, and then 2 other books growing out of it. And the 4 of us are continuing to work together as a writing group, just we're having a good time. But my part is the 7 deadly sins of white Christian nationalism. And basically, it will not surprise you to hear that the sins are omnipotence, or power over. Now we could talk about that in relationship to God, but I'm focusing, of course, on how people are attempting to be, in quote, like God, in an unhelpful way, to say the least. But that omnipotence, the power over, is a deadly sin. So there's a chapter about that. Then there's a chapter about the lust to be best, on top, the most, have the most. That's a deadly sin. I'm calling those sins of the soul, the collective soul, and I think they're universal. They're not sort of all American sins, but we happen to embody them collectively in a particularly dangerous way, given who we are in the world. And then there are the sins of white supremacy, misogyny, and that links up, of course, with homophobia and all matters of gender, as well as anti-female stuff. And then there's what my beloved former partner and dear friend Beverly Harrison named as capitalist spirituality. And that could be 5 books in itself. And Then there is the devastation and plundering of the earth and earth creatures. And then there is the overarching sin of violence as the go-to solution to just about everything. So, and then there's, of course, my books, unfortunately, are linear, but there's nothing linear about those sins. They're all mixed up together and mingled.
Yeah.
And any one of them can be taken by by the apparatus of our government or any government and used to crack down on dissident groups raising questions, all in the name of national security. Yeah. And so I'm working on that book. I've written about 2/3 of it, but I was talking to my editor the other day, and I said, at some point I've got to stop doing research, because every day there's something else that needs to be talked about.
Right.
And so I'm about at the point where I'm going to say, look, but after October the 31st, I'm not going to deal with any more current events. I don't know how that'll go, but that's what that book's about. And
yeah, well, adding just a little to that, politics is local.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've become involved in here in our local community is the run for school board.
Oh, my Lord.
This is a lot of where the struggle is now. And we have candidates running on no masks, no vaccines, no critical race theory, and no trans bathrooms.
Yes.
Right. And I have now for a long time theologically felt that the reason transgender is such a site for violence and persecution is that, in fact, transgender folks challenge Plato. It's the male, female, grace, sin, the whole division that we manage the world through. It's either this or it's that. Well, you're trans, so you're not. And so I think talk about the body as a site for struggle, but it's all at the local right now. It's at the local level.
It is.
And it is an attempt to capture local education for teaching you're white, or if you're not white, you should be ashamed of yourself. But white people, hooray, that's the critical race theory. And I've done a number of calls with church people who want to stand up at these school board meetings and say critical race theory is baloney, what you're talking about. It's the truth of American history. And I actually wrote something on that for local people to use, to say, this is just malarkey. But it's not malarkey. It's what Carter is saying. Well, it's white supremacy.
And
that is, yeah.
I'm going to say Dorothy Zola back in the early 1980s called what she was seeing happening first under Ronald Reagan, Christo-fascism.
Right.
Christo-fascism, literally in America, the two going together. And those of you, I imagine on this call, know Dorothy Zola's work, but German political theologian, became a feminist theologian and died unfortunately in 2003. But she was a radical Christian theologian and was just an astonishing writer, poet, and whatever. But she was beside herself with what she believed was in the United States of America building up 40 years ago as a Christo-fascist movement. That began with the election of Ronald Reagan. Now, you can actually go back way further than that and see the seeds of this in the reaction of the business community and the Christian community against the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt back in the 1930s and 40s, when business interests and realized that they needed the Christian evangelicals and eventually conservative Catholics as well. This would come later,
right?
To keep politicians in hand. And so people who seem to some people at least to be as benign as Billy Graham and some of the Christian evangelists who were way, way, way better than the ones we see today for the most part in terms of being presentable, nonetheless linked up with business leaders, the head of the oil companies, to make it impossible for most politicians to move too far out of their orbits. So anyhow, that's I'll be happy to come back sometime and talk more about this, but let me just say one more thing about my book. The reason the editors accepted it for publication is they said there's so much being written about Christian nationalism, or white Christian nationalism, if you will, all over the place. Fabulous books already out there and others coming out, I'm sure. She said the one thing that we haven't seen yet and why they liked mine, and I hope this is going to, I won't disappoint them. This is a book by a Christian written to Christians. Now others are happy to, are willing, I'm happy for people to read it. In fact, I would love to hear eventually from other than Christian people about it, but I'm really trying to say, hey, Christians, wake up. I'm not trying to deal with the far right Christians. I just can't worry about them right now. I think the only way to reach those people is on bridges between those of us who are way more left and where they are. But there's this huge silent majority right in the middle of the Christian church that they don't like Trump, but they don't want to be socialist. They are all for gays and lesbians getting married, but they don't like to talk about sexuality in any other kind of shape or form. You know what I mean?
Yes, of course.
I'm right to those people more than really to anybody else, saying, look, you don't have to agree with me on anything. We don't have to have the same Christology. I can believe one thing about Jesus of Nazareth, and you can talk about Jesus Christ till the cows come home. That's fine and wonderful. But let's talk about what it all means together. Please, let's just talk about what we can do together to save this democracy of ours and to allow space for all of us to breathe as people who are on spiritual journeys that are not the same journey, but we have the same basic values of love and justice and compassion. How can we do this? That's why this book is being written.
Carter, to date, okay? When the book, now, there's questions in the feed here. When is this book going to be published?
Well, it's probably not for about 9 or 10 more months.
All right. Well, definitely, Lisa, right? It's a date. You come back, Carter. I'll interview you, and we'll do it, and have that discussion. Back over to you, Lisa.
Yeah, it's absolutely a date. There are, this has been fabulous. There are all kinds of comments and questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we are coming to the time of the end of our discussion time and a time for us to turn to some announcements for the community. But I'm so grateful to both of you for your presence, for this this time of learning together and thinking through just sort of tracing the history back from the 1960s to where we find ourselves today and seeing those linkages there. And Susan, in my intro, I mentioned you're a champion of public theology and talked about your writings in the Vale Daily where you live. But, it is certainly the case that through these novels, these mystery novels, it's another arm for your public theology work. And accessible in different ways. And so again, I encourage folks, if you haven't read the books, grab them, get them, do a book study with some of those in the middle folk that Carter was mentioning, because a novel might be a way to introduce some topics that otherwise would be sort of hot button issues.
If your congregation is struggling with racism in particular, When Demons Float, it's about white supremacists infiltrating a college campus. And my detective professor person cannot solve it if she's horrified by this and she moves away, but she realizes she can't solve it unless she gets closer to what it is in her whiteness they have in common. And that, friends, is a tricky subject for white people dealing with race. But if you don't get to that level, you're just skimming the surface. Back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Susan. I'm going to turn now. We just have a couple of quick community announcements. Dr. Ringer.
Good afternoon. First, just want to say it's been a delight being able to listen to these giants in our field. So thank you so much for your presence. I just want to invite the community to our 15th annual Rooks lecture tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, where we will welcome Dr. Carrie Day from Princeton Theological Seminary, and she is going to be examining her own tradition of Pentecostalism to think about a radical belonging, the religious imagination, and what that means for the possibility of democracy. And right after that, we'll have a wonderful conversation with Bishop Yvette Flunder, Ashton Crowley, Erica Williams, Reverend Erica Williams from the Poor People's Campaign. Now will be moderated by our very own Candace Laughinghouse. So again, 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. And I think I should have had this ready, I'm sorry. Is Marie on the line? Can we put the link in the chat?
We will do it for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Link coming in the chat.
Thank you.
Haley has an announcement on behalf of our Student Government Association.
Hello, everyone. Yes, that's right. So this is an announcement for students only, current students. We sent out a poll, a student poll, to just get a grasp on, what people's needs are as students when it comes to class or accessing resources or any kind of struggles, or, it's like a survey to see how people are doing with highs, lows. And also on that survey is asking what time you prefer for a town hall. We are planning our town hall soon, so we want to get a gauge on what dates and times work for people, as well as there's a question about maybe a student only group, because I know that there have been some wants from students to be able to talk to students only and not be in Facebook groups that have staff and faculty as well. Sorry, staff and faculty. But I think there's been a bit of request for a student only group. So there's also a question on there that talks about that. So I'm going to put the poll in the link to our student poll in the group chat. It's also anonymous. So students do not have to write their name on the poll as well. And you could be anonymous in that. And again, I hope, students only, please fill out this poll, and it's due by October 19th, which is Tuesday of next week. So a couple of days into reading week, which is next week. So reading week is then. So if you all can get that in by the end of this week, early next week, that would be really great. And I know that 40 plus students have already filled out the poll. So we appreciate everyone who's filled it out. And if you need access to this, just email me or email the student rep email as well. That's student reps. So all student reps, straightforward, at ctschicago.edu. Thank you.
Thanks, Haley. Every week, in an effort to support our students who we know are always in need of caffeine, we give away a Starbucks gift card. And this week's winner is Sarah Foster. So Sarah, watch your email for a Starbucks gift card to come. And I would love to invite you all to come back next week for our Wednesday gathering time. We will be welcoming interim president, Dr. Marcia Foster Boyd. She will be in conversation with our interim dean, Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva, thinking about what it is to live through an interim time. So it will be another fantastic conversation between two amazing women next week. We always meet at noon on Wednesdays, and the link is the same. So the link that got you here today can get you here next Wednesday. So I hope to see all of you then. Again, Susan and Carter, our deepest thanks to you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Blessings and peace to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you. Bye.